Are you ready to experience fear like never before? Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. From the unsettling stare of a nightmare clown, to the cursed halls of a Halloween festival, and finally, to an old suitcase hiding dark secrets that should have remained buried. Each story will pull you deeper into a world where the line between reality and nightmare fades away. Think you can handle it? Watch till the end, if you dare. The Nightmare Clown. One fateful night, Sarah and her friends discovered an abandoned amusement park at the edge of their town, a place that had been closed for years, but now its old, faded lights flickered back on, and its silent grounds seemed to call out. The only figure in sight was a clown with a painted smile, promising an unforgettable night. Sarah, a young woman from the small town of Willow Creek, had always been fascinated by thrill-seeking adventures. She and her friends Ben, Jenny, and Mike were inseparable, and they shared a love for all things mysterious and spooky. So when they heard rumors of the deserted amusement park coming back to life, they couldn't resist the temptation to explore it. The park was supposed to have been shut down years ago after a series of tragic accidents. People whispered about ghosts of those who had died on the rides, and said that the laughter of children could still be heard echoing in the empty grounds. But Sarah and her friends didn't believe in ghosts. They saw it as a perfect opportunity for an adrenaline rush. That night, they parked their car by the broken fence and slipped into the park. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and only the faint glow of old bulbs lit up the area. As they ventured further in, they noticed something strange, a figure standing near the old carousel. It was a clown, dressed in a faded red and yellow costume with an oversized bow tie and an eerie grin painted on his face. "Welcome to the show," he greeted them in a voice that was both cheerful and menacing. The sound sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she brushed it off as part of the thrill. The clown gestured for them to follow him. "Do you think he's an actor?" whispered Ben, nudging Sarah. She shrugged, assuming that maybe someone had set up a haunted attraction. The clown led them to the roller coaster and gestured for them to get on. The ride creaked and groaned, and the tracks looked rusted, but in the dark, everything seemed like part of the thrill. They all strapped in, laughing nervously as the clown started the ride. As the roller coaster lurched forward, Sarah noticed the clown staring at her with unblinking eyes. His smile grew wider as the ride accelerated, and when they reached the highest point, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Then, suddenly, the lights went out. The roller coaster screeched to a halt at the top, leaving them hanging in the darkness. Panic set in, and her friends started yelling, calling out for help. Sarah could barely make out the figure of the clown below them, his smile barely visible in the dark. A cold, mocking laugh echoed through the air. After what felt like an eternity, the ride resumed, bringing them back to the ground. They scrambled out, their nerves rattled, but the clown was gone. "Let's get out of here," Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. But as they turned to leave, the clown appeared again, standing in front of them with his head tilted and his eyes wide, unblinking. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock sadness. "But the fun has just begun." Ben tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "This place is seriously creepy, man. Who are you?" The clown's smile widened, his painted mouth stretching unnaturally. "I am the keeper of nightmares," he whispered, and in that moment, his cheerful tone vanished, replaced by something dark, something ancient. The air around them grew cold, and the shadows seemed to thicken. Sarah tried to move, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. Then, the lights around them flickered, casting the clown's distorted shadow across the walls. His face twisted, the painted smile warping into a malicious grin, and his eyes, once hollow, were now filled with a terrifying, unnatural glow. "Let's play a game," he murmured, reaching out with his gloved hand. One by one, her friends froze, their bodies stiffening, as though an invisible force had taken hold of them. The clown looked directly at Sarah. "You wanted a thrill, didn't you?" he asked softly. His hand touched her shoulder, cold as ice, and she felt the world spin around her. The ground gave way, and suddenly they were in a hall of mirrors. Distorted reflections of themselves stared back at them from every angle. The clown's laughter echoed in the confined space, bouncing off the glass. "Which one of you is real?" his voice taunted from every direction. Her friends were scattered across the maze, their voices growing frantic as they tried to find each other. but every turn only led them back to the same reflection of the clown's haunting face, grinning wider with each step they took. "Stop. Leave us alone." Jenny's voice trembled, but the clown only laughed louder. The mirrors reflected his face again and again, filling the space with his grinning, menacing eyes. Sarah ran, desperate to escape the endless reflections, but no matter how fast she moved, the clown was always there, just behind her in the glass, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, she stumbled into a small room at the center of the maze. There, in the dim light, she saw an old photograph, a group of children standing beside the same clown, their faces expressionless, their eyes hollow. The clown was younger in the photo, his smile not as wide but just as disturbing. Then she saw it, her own face reflected beside his, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. "Now, you're part of the show," the clown whispered from behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Only the echo of his laughter growing fainter as the lights flickered and the room faded into darkness. When the police arrived the next morning, they found no trace of Sarah or her friends. The amusement park was empty, silent, as though it had never been inhabited. The only clue was a small, dusty photograph, lying on the ground near the old carousel, a faded picture of a clown, and a new group of children, their faces blank, eyes hollow, eternally part of the nightmare show. The Festival of Horrors. Emma and her friends eagerly awaited the annual Halloween festival in their small town. But this year, something felt different. In the shadows of the carnival tents and the eerie glow of the fairground lights, something sinister lurked, waiting for them to step just a little too close. Emma, a college student with a love for Halloween, had been looking forward to the festival for weeks. Every year, the town transformed the old fairgrounds into a spooky carnival with haunted houses, costumed actors, and eerie decorations. It was the highlight of the season, and Emma, along with her friends Mark, Lucy, and David, was ready for the night of scares and laughter. The festival grounds were alive with energy, people in costumes, laughter, and music mixing with the crisp autumn air. But as Emma walked through the entrance, she felt an unsettling chill run down her spine. It was as though something was watching her, hiding in the shadows between the tents. Maybe it's just the Halloween vibe, she thought, shaking off the feeling. They wandered through the haunted houses, screamed at the jump scares, and laughed at the absurd costumes. But everywhere Emma went, she felt that same sensation, an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. She noticed a clown standing by one of the tents, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her shiver. His face paint was cracked, and his red smile stretched far too wide, almost as if painted by a trembling hand. "Emma, come on," Mark called, snapping her out of her daze. She forced a smile and followed her friends, but couldn't shake the feeling that the clown was still watching her. Later, they decided to explore the main attraction, a maze called the Labyrinth of Terror. The maze was filled with fog, mirrors, and actors dressed as all manner of creatures and ghouls. The dim lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that twisted and moved with each step they took. As they entered the maze, Emma felt her heart race. The walls were high and painted with scenes of horror, dark forests, graveyards, and sinister clowns peeking from behind trees. They laughed nervously as they made their way through, but the deeper they went, the more the atmosphere changed. "Do you guys feel that?" Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible over the haunting music playing in the background. "Yeah, it's creepy," David replied, his usual bravado gone. Mark just shrugged, but Emma saw the unease in his eyes. They continued deeper, but the path became harder to follow. The mirrors reflected distorted versions of themselves, stretched and twisted, and each reflection seemed to move a fraction of a second after they did. Emma looked at one of the mirrors and saw the same clown from earlier, his face impossibly close, his eyes wide and his smile unnaturally broad. "Guys, there's that clown again," she said, her voice shaking. But when her friends turned to look, he was gone, leaving only an empty reflection in the mirror. "Are you okay?" Emma, Lucy asked, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Emma nodded, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. They tried to find their way out, but each path seemed to lead them back to the center of the maze. The fog thickened, and the music grew louder, the notes distorted and eerie. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, and every now and then they heard faint laughter echoing through the maze. Suddenly the clown reappeared, standing at the end of one of the corridors. His costume was filthy, his makeup smudged, and his eyes shone with a twisted, malevolent glee. Slowly, he lifted a finger and beckoned them forward. "No way," Mark muttered, grabbing Lucy's hand. "We're getting out of here." But every turn they took only seemed to bring them closer to the clown. His laughter echoed through the maze, louder and more unsettling, each laugh resonating with a sickening joy. Emma's heart pounded, and she fought the urge to scream. The clown was everywhere, his face appearing in every mirror, watching them, laughing at their fear. At one point, they found themselves back at the start of the maze, but the entrance was gone, replaced by a blank wall. They were trapped. "How is this possible?" David whispered, panic in his eyes. "This is supposed to be a carnival attraction, right?" Emma's throat felt tight, and her hands were shaking. She turned to look in one of the mirrors, hoping to see the exit, but instead she saw her own face reflected back at her, pale and frightened. Standing just behind her, barely visible, was the clown, his smile wider than ever. Emma spun around, but there was no one there. The laughter continued, closer and closer, until it felt like it was inside her own mind. In a final desperate attempt, they ran down another corridor, but the walls seemed to close in, the mirrors warping their reflections into twisted versions of themselves. Emma looked at her reflection and saw herself with the same grotesque, painted smile as the clown, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She stumbled back, colliding with Mark, who was frantically looking for a way out. But the maze had them, and every turn, every twist brought them back to the clown, waiting, laughing, his face a horrifying mask of pure evil. Finally, they reached a dead end. The clown stood before them, blocking the way. His face was inches from Emma's, and she could feel his cold breath on her skin. His eyes glinted with a hunger that was anything but human. "Welcome to my festival of horrors," he whispered, his voice a chilling rasp. Emma felt her legs give way as darkness closed in. The next morning, the festival grounds were empty. The staff found no trace of Emma or her friends. The maze was just a collection of mirrors and fog machines, with no signs of any sinister presence. But the staff noticed something strange: a new set of photographs on the walls, faded and dusty. Each photo showed a group of festival goers smiling, their faces eerily similar to Emma, Mark, Lucy, and David. Their eyes were hollow, and their mouths twisted into wide, unnatural grins, forever trapped in the clown's twisted carnival. The old suitcase. When Lisa found an old, dusty suitcase in her attic, she thought she'd discovered a piece of her family's past. But as she dug deeper, she realized that some things are better left forgotten. Lisa, a young woman with a love for antiques, had recently moved into her grandmother's old house. The place was filled with dusty furniture, creaky floorboards, and a treasure trove of memories. She spent her days sorting through her grandmother's things, carefully preserving photos, letters, and trinkets that had been hidden away for years. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, Lisa found an old suitcase tucked away in the farthest corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. The suitcase was heavy, with dark leather and brass locks, its surface scratched and worn. She wondered why her grandmother had never mentioned it before. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to bring it downstairs to open. She sat on the living room floor, brushing off the dust, and noticed that the suitcase didn't have any labels or markings to indicate its origin. It seemed strangely ominous, as though it had been waiting for someone to find it. With a deep breath, Lisa unlatched the locks and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of old clothes, faded and brittle with age. Underneath them were strange, unmarked photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. The faces of the people in the pictures were blurred, their expressions twisted in fear or pain. She felt a chill run down her spine, but her curiosity urged her to continue. As she sifted through the contents, she found a small, worn journal tucked at the bottom of the suitcase. Its pages were yellowed, and the handwriting inside was shaky and uneven. The entries were dated decades ago, though none of the names or locations were familiar. One entry caught her attention. "I can hear them again tonight. They whisper to me in the dark, calling my name. They say they are waiting, that they will never leave." The suitcase is cursed. I should have never opened it." Lisa's hands began to tremble. The words felt eerily personal, as though the writer was speaking directly to her. She closed the journal, her heart pounding, and decided to put everything back and return the suitcase to the attic. But when she tried to close the lid, she noticed something peculiar. The suitcase was heavier than before. A strange sense of dread washed over her. She glanced around the room, feeling as if someone or something was watching her. She forced herself to breathe, dismissing it as her imagination, and returned the suitcase to the attic. That night, Lisa lay in bed, unable to shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She tossed and turned, trying to convince herself that the unsettling experience with the suitcase was just an overreaction. But as she drifted off, she heard a faint creaking noise coming from the attic. She sat up, her pulse racing. The sound grew louder, echoing through the silent house. It was as if someone was dragging something heavy across the attic floor. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and crept up the stairs, her footsteps soft and deliberate. When she reached the attic, she swung the beam of light across the room. Everything was as she had left it except for the suitcase, which was now open. The clothes and photographs were scattered across the floor, as though someone had rifled through them in a frenzy. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the suitcase, dreading what she might find. Then she noticed something new, a handwritten note lying inside the suitcase. It hadn't been there before. The ink was fresh, the letters sharp and precise. "You opened it. Now it's yours." Lisa stumbled back, her breath hitching. She couldn't explain how the note had appeared or why the suitcase seemed to have a life of its own. She wanted to run, to leave the house and never return, but something compelled her to stay, as if an unseen force had taken hold of her. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. She would hear whispers in the middle of the night, faint but persistent, calling her name. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, darting away whenever she tried to focus on them. Her belongings would go missing, only to reappear in the suitcase as if it was claiming them as its own. One evening, she found herself sitting in front of the suitcase, unable to look away. The photographs inside had changed. The faces, once blurred, were now clearer, and she recognized them. They were people she had seen in her dreams, people who stared at her with hollow eyes, pleading for help. Desperation overtook her, and she decided to destroy the suitcase. She took it out to the backyard, doused it in gasoline, and set it ablaze. The flames roared, and she felt a brief moment of relief, hoping that the nightmare was over. But as the fire died down, she noticed something horrifying. The suitcase was untouched, not a single burn mark on its leather surface. It lay there, pristine and undamaged, as if mocking her. Terrified, Lisa brought the suitcase back inside and locked it in the basement, hoping to contain whatever malevolent force it held. But that night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. She could feel the presence growing stronger, its hold on her tightening. Days turned into weeks, and Lisa became a shadow of herself. She barely slept, her mind plagued by visions of the suitcase and the haunting images inside it. She couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. The suitcase was a part of her now, bound to her by some ancient, unbreakable curse. In a final act of desperation, she wrote a note, much like the one she had found in the suitcase. "If you find this, do not open the suitcase. Leave it and let it remain forgotten. Once you open it, you belong to it." Lisa placed the note inside the suitcase, her hands trembling, and left it in the attic. She locked the door, hoping that someone would heed her warning and leave it untouched. But the suitcase waited, patient and silent, for the next person to find it, to unlock its secrets, and to fall victim to its curse. Thank you for joining us on this journey through terrifying tales of clowns, haunted festivals, and cursed suitcases. If these stories sent chills down your spine, there's more where that came from. We're just getting started, and with your support, we can dive even deeper into the darkest corners of horror. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe. If we reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll be able to bring you these spine-tingling tales even more often. Your support means everything, so let's grow this horror community together. Until next time, stay scared.